Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zervis, the Director of BIM Development and Technical Evangelist here at CTC Software. And today we're going to start at the beginning of the HIVE CMS Admin Learning Series and talk about the very important topic of the CMS settings and what they all mean. As always, these webinars are of course recorded. And also, as always, if you have questions about any of these settings while I'm talking about them today, I encourage you to throw them into the questions window, and I will try to answer any of those questions live. But we also always save a big Q&A session for the end of the webinar itself. So what are we actually covering today in this particular webinar? I mean, as a Hive admin, we really need to know how to configure Hive so that it works really well for our entire team. Like that's pretty critical. Having these settings configured in really non-optimal ways for how you need to work, what that really means is that your designers, your team members don't get the best experience within Hive. They may not be able to use it very well because the settings that are put in place based on what we've configured just isn't really optimal for them. Now our default settings are pretty decent, but they really might not be exactly what it is you want. So what I want to do in this webinar is I want to go through some very deep detail on all of the critical Hive CMS settings. I want to explain what they mean, and I want to explain a bit about how it will or may affect your team's user experience. Okay? We're going to go through this from a couple of points of view here. We are going to talk specifically about how to navigate to the control panel in case you haven't done that before. We're going to talk about inspecting the default user settings for when you create a brand new user and what that will, modifying those, what that will do to team members. We are then going to also dig into the organization-wide settings that affect users even after they've been generated, but also the whole organization, how it works with the Hive CMS. And finally, we're going to configure and save some of these settings so that you can see exactly how this process works so you can configure Hive CMS to exactly your needs for your organization. I'll make some recommendations as we go throughout, and if you have access to the Hive admin portal, I encourage you to follow along. And you can actually set up your Hive settings for your organization and for your default new users in pretty much the exact same way I am, or whatever you need for your organization directly. Since I'm not big on death by PowerPoint, I want to jump in live and talk about this live in the system here. Oh, look at that. I actually have an old path here specified. We're going to get rid of that path, and we're just going to go directly to ctcsoftware.com. So www.ctcsoftware.com is how you get to the portal. Now you can use your smartphone, your tablet, your kid's Chromebook. You can use, your desktop, Windows computer, MacBook. Doesn't matter. It's just a website. So as long as you have a web-enabled device that can browse websites, you can go there. If you're going to go there commonly, I recommend you bookmark it because it's going to make your life just a little bit easier. And that's what I typically do as well. Now I happen to have this already pulled up, and so I'm going to jump in and take a look at this directly in wrong tab, directly in my web browser here. So we're going to go through and take a look at those different discrete areas, how to navigate to the portal, inspecting the settings, organization-wide settings, and how to configure and save those settings. So here from the portal, you're going to go to the far right area over here to the little person. Yours probably will not be filled in. It'll be an outline because you may not have signed in recently. And so you can go ahead and click on that. That'll bring you to the login page where you're going to sign in with your Hive credentials. And if you have admin rights, you'll be able to see everything that I see here with a full license of Hive or a trial of Hive, and with organization admin or Hive CMS admin level rights. We talk about what those rights are, what they mean, in a different one of our pre-recorded webinars. I would encourage you to take a look on our YouTube channel where this video is going to go in the Hive Admin Learning Series, and take a look at how to admin users and user groups and how to set up rights, because we talk about that in pretty big detail over there in that other webinar. So I'm not going to recap it here. To get to the actual organization settings, we're going to go to CMS right here. CMS at the top. On the left-hand side, we're going to go down to the settings drawer right here, fly that out, and there's two areas for settings, one for the organization and one for users. Now, the user settings is where we're going to start our journey today, and just take a look at the default user settings. Now, I say default very explicitly because when we are creating users, they use these settings upon creation, but once generated, I mean, they can change them to whatever they want. So this only affects brand new users as you add them into the HIVE CMS. Users themselves can further customize this after they've been made and after they've logged in. So let's take a look at what these settings are, what they mean. Within the user settings, there's the ability to create logged data about their HIVE session. So if they happen to have a problem while they're using HIVE for some reason, maybe their explicit virtual machine environment's doing something squirrely. Maybe they're on an outdated version of HIVE and it's not able to open for some reason, and you're trying to figure out exactly why that is. What I like to do is I like to log verbose data. It's not a problem, it's just more detail in the log file. Some companies like to just log errors exclusively, or they like to log errors and warnings. I personally like verbose. This tells me absolutely everything that happens, so if you ever have to send us a log file, you've already got the detailed data at your fingertips. Now, this doesn't actually affect anything about how HIVE itself works. This just tracks a little bit about the logging, and it's up to you to decide how you want to do logging. So by default, you can set this to verbose, and then when users are created in the system through the Users and Groups panel up here, that will become their default setting if that's what you choose. I would do that personally. You may want to turn off the default setting here for notifying your end users in your company when HIVE updates are available when they sign into HIVE. Some companies leave this on. If all of your users can install HIVE, fantastic. Leave that checked. They can self-serve the update when they're ready. But if you have an IT team that likes to push out installs, or the user needs admin rights and not all users have admin rights, you might not want to be notifying every single user when they first sign on. So you can uncheck this. You yourselves, the admins, you should check that back on for yourselves in your account for your users so you can be notified when there's an update, but the rest of your team doesn't necessarily need to be notified by default. So you can turn this off if you want to. There's also the default here to determine globally when you first create users whether or not they see the type selector dialog box when they're loading a family into Revit. This is a Revit specific setting, but you can decide whether or not those users actually see that type selector. Now, if you uncheck it, they'll never see the type selector, and Revit by default will load every single type available to the family, whether it has a type catalog or not. That might bloat your projects a bit. Personally, I like seeing that type selector. I like prompting users to be selective and discrete. So you can go ahead and check that box to have that turned on for users, again, by default when they get created. Now, if you've been using HIVE and you've run a search, you might know that the very first page of search results by default is 25 search results, 25 discrete items. Some people like that, some people want a bit more. So here, if you want to control how your users get those search results, the number they get when they first run a search, you can update that right here. I've found that most companies like the balance of about 50 search results. And so you can certainly change that default here so that when you make brand new users, that will be their default search result count as well. And then as they scroll down, they'll get 50 additional results and 50 more and 50 more if there's enough to justify that. So 50 is a good number, I think. You can set that and get that default for users when you make them. Now, existing users, none of these settings, again, affect any of the existing users. All right, finally here, you can set the default preview image size in pixels. My balance that I kind of like on average is about 100 pixels in size. Some companies like a bit more, like 125. I think the default is 117. It's okay. It's up to you what you want. You can just set a default, make a user, see how it looks. Doesn't really matter. This is just sort of more if you really want to set that, you can. Most companies just leave it alone and let users do whatever they want. We have a webinar that teaches users how they can change the preview image size, and sometimes I adjust it depending on what kind of view of content I'm using. So this is really less relevant, I think. You don't really need to worry about it, but you can change it to a specific default if you want. Ultimately, when you're done going through these user settings, you can click Save. That will lock in those changes for those users for brand new users when you generate them. All right. Now that we've saved that, let's jump over to the organization settings. These are the bigger settings that affect the whole company-wide use of Hive. You can change these whenever you want, and they affect everybody as you're leveraging this. Again, we're going to go through every single one of these settings and checkboxes, and I want to explain what every single one of them means so you know exactly what a change to this might mean for your firm. I'm going to give some recommendations on some of these, and some of these, it's whatever. You do whatever you need to do. So the very top checkbox here is to notify if a software update is available. And you might say, hey, Sean, didn't we just look at that in the user settings? We did actually. Now this is, the user setting is more user by user, or for the general users in the firm, do I want them to discreetly be notified? If I have this checkbox checked, this is more, does Hive notify anybody in my firm of an update? Does it have that ability? I leave this checked so that users, specifically you, the admins, can choose to be notified when updates are available, so you can make a plan as to when you want to roll that out to your firm if you're doing that sort of push, via IT. Again, I would certainly leave this checked if anybody can, optionally install whenever they want to, and then I would also, if that was the case, again in the user area, have that checked as well if they can, optionally, subjectively install on demand. So, but this I would leave checked normally anyway, so that you can be notified of updates. I mean, I haven't found a single company that really doesn't want to be notified, but in case you did, you could choose to turn this off. There is a feature in Hive that is a requests engine. In fact, it targets them to this Hive requests portion on the portal. So authenticated users for your company can place requests, they can navigate to here, and they can work with requests within this Hive system. If you check this enable content requests by default, that's what it will do. The add request button will show up in the Hive CMS interface. In fact, let me open up the Hive CMS interface so you can actually see the button that I'm referring to here. It's going to open up here in just a second. Once it authenticates me and checks whether I can see it, this enable content requests checkbox, what it does is it enables this add request button, which directs them by default to the Hive requests portion on the site. Now, if you don't want them to go to the Hive request portion, but you have your own internal request system, your own help desk, your own ticketing environment, and you want your users to go there instead when they click this add request, that's fine. You can redirect them by entering here what the request URL is for your own internal requesting system. Then it'll completely ignore this Hive request and directs them to your internal system. And in fact, you can even turn off this Hive request button here. We have a different webinar on how to do that. But this here is more about how the Hive CMS interacts with requests. So you can tell it to enable it, but to redirect them to your own internal system by changing this URL here. Just copy and paste the URL you want them to go to out of your web browser and drop it right into here. All right. Hive itself has a caching location. Not money cache, of course. Nope, we're talking about the cache, a local sort of pseudo copy of the content that they use regularly. When a user runs a search out of Hive and they grab a piece of content and use it in their own project or their own drawing environment, when they double click on that, what Hive does is it caches it from the Hive cloud. If the content is web hosted, it caches it from the Hive cloud to their local computer and then loads it from that local location. Where is that location? Well, it's right here. The Hive cache location is users app data, folder CTC Hive content cache. Now, you can change this if you want to. If you don't want it to go to the app data, maybe you want it to go to local app data, maybe you want it to go someplace else completely, you can change where this goes. Should be someplace in the user's local machine, though. Hive will create this folder if it doesn't have it, and it will start to drop content into it. Now, Hive also has the ability to clean up after itself. Here, with the auto delete after checkbox, if you check it, it will automatically delete content found in this cache that hasn't been refreshed or renewed in the past X number of time. And that time is 30 days. So that's the default. If you want to change that and you're like, no, only do 15 days, or you know what, 30 is not enough, do 45 days, you can adjust whatever that time is for it to auto-delete old unused content off of their computer so it can clean up after itself. That way it doesn't just bloat their computer unnecessarily. If they're using Hive, they're using content regularly, then it makes Hive run faster by leveraging this cache. But if they're not using that content, no point in leaving it there. That's what this auto delete after does after X amount of time. Similarly, we were talking on the user area about how detailed the log files are when they're using Hive and opening Hive. The very verbose version of using in Hive, the very verbose logging, goes into, or actually all the logging goes into this area right here. App data, CTC Hive, you might see a pattern here, the logs folder right there. Now again, you can redirect this if you want to. You can put this wherever you want it to go. And once again, because especially if you're using those verbose logs, those files, I mean, they're not big. They're super tiny. They're like 1K, sometimes 5K in file size. They're super small. But you know, it's still good to clean up after yourself. And so again, there's the ability to automatically delete log files after X number of time. And the default again is 30 days, I believe. So the default might actually be 14 days, and I've set mine to 30. But you know, whatever. You can set these numbers to whatever you feel is appropriate. I do like a 30-day cycle for this. If I'm not using content at least that frequently, well, then it can go ahead and get deleted. Okay, let's talk about some of the library settings down here. And this is where I'm going to start making some very explicit recommendations for most of us as we're going through and working with these settings and working with Hive in general. There is the ability here to disable anybody in the company from sharing your libraries with any external companies. If you want to completely keep it internal, fantastic. You can do that. You can simply uncheck this box. Nobody in your company, even you, will be able to share or invite somebody from an outside firm to leverage your content. Now, if you never partner externally and you never want to allow that, you can leverage this checkbox. But if you often are partnering with companies outside of your firm where you all want to use the exact same library, well, this allows sharing might be a really good way to let them gain access to your content. Now, this only works if your content is actually cached in the cloud, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a good way to kind of control that for your firm as a whole. Just below that, there's this option here to allow public libraries. Now, this one is one where I recommend you uncheck this box. This does not mean allow you guys to access and subscribe to public libraries. What this checkbox means is, can you take your libraries and make them public for the world to be able to get freely, where you have no control over who is actually subscribing to your content? People can just subscribe when they want to. Now, we have an entire webinar about public libraries up here and how to subscribe to them. I suggest you go take a look at that. Public libraries are really powerful. Companies who are building product manufacturers, who make products and provide Revit content for designers to consume and use, will want this checked. Most design companies out there, if you're an architecture or engineering firm and you're doing design, you almost certainly do not want to accidentally share your libraries with the world. You probably don't want that. So I would recommend unchecking this or leaving it unchecked if it is already unchecked, so that you can't accidentally take one of your discrete libraries that you make. And again, we've got a webinar for that, talking about how to do that management. But you could uncheck this to make it so that any of your team members couldn't accidentally turn that on without knowing first to go here and intentionally enable it. This is one that I strongly suggest all design firms uncheck or leave unchecked. Okay, The next one here is the ability to auto-filter for the active design app version. What in the world does that mean? Well, if you check this, what will happen in Revit, or in Hive over here, when you're using the Hive product itself is the following. In the active design app, we're primarily speaking here about Revit, but this can also affect AutoCAD. If I was working in Revit 2020, and if this was checked when I had opened the Hive CMS, what would have happened is this version down here would have automatically set itself to Revit 2020. And if I apply this search now, you can see maybe you might notice that these search results are different than what they were. Some of my content is no longer here. That single swing door that was up here in the top left is no longer here because it doesn't exist in the Revit version 2020. So I can manually override that. I could uncheck it and hit apply, and it would show me some extra content here. But when a user clicks clear filters here, or when an end user clicks clear filters here, what would happen is this version filter would be automatically set, and only Revit 2020 content, when Revit content is displayed, is found, could be displayed up here. And so that can be kind of frustrating for an end user. So unless you as a BIM manager are actively sort of creating content in proper version years and curating that and putting it into Hive, I probably wouldn't check this box. Some companies that I work with do have very explicit content version year by version year, and that's why this option exists. If you do that, then you probably do want this box checked, because it just saves the user from needing to check and filter for an explicit version year. There's a secondary option here that's sort of a part of that, which is to automatically update search results to match the active design app. Now, these two are dependent, well, this one here is dependent upon the first one. If I uncheck the first one, you'll notice this one grays out because this doesn't do anything if this wasn't checked in the first place. But they work together. Automatically filter for the active design app is one thing. That means when I'm in a design app and when I clear my filters, set this filter to that version. But if it automatically updates my search results as well, then if I had another version of Revit open up here and I switch to that version, what it will do is actually, like say I had 2022 open here, it would automatically refresh my search to only give me 2022 content. So if I was running my search for doors and it automatically set that 2022 filter, I might not get anything because I'm not curating version year by version year. But also, as the user switched into Revit version 22, this trigger right here would have made it refresh their search and gave them nothing as they open that up. And that might frustrate them. So I personally don't use this setting myself ever, but some companies that I work with, again, who curate their content version year by version year, also want to force the user to always have their search results updated to match that version year if they have multiple version years of Revit open at the same time. Okay? I personally always run with these both unchecked. You can make your own choice, but I would recommend early on in your Revit lifecycle, don't check these. You can always come back and check them later and see how it affects you and your user team while you're working in Revit once you've got most of your content loaded in. Okay? So I'm going to leave my two unchecked because I certainly don't want them set. I'm also going to leave my Allow Public Libraries turned on for now because I do want that set for other demonstrations I do with how I work with libraries. So you will probably want yours unchecked. In fact, you know what? I'll leave this unchecked for now, and I'll let you take a big screenshot of what my settings are here at the end with your stock recommended settings so you can make it match later if you want to. There's an ability here to send an email notification when any external user is invited to a library. It actually sends them a notification, hey, you've been given access to this new library, which is great. That is external users. So if I was up here in libraries and I had allow sharing turned on up here, so that allows external invites, when I invite them, it'll actually send them an email. So if I sent an email to my buddy at his company at gmail.com or whatever their email address was, then he gets notified, Sean has invited you to this library in their Hive, and then it gives them a link to how they can get to it. If you don't want to notify them, you can turn off this email here, this email notification, and when you invite external users, they will only know that they've been invited by you telling them, or when they go into Hive over here, it will appear in their libraries list, okay? I personally like to communicate with them when I actually invite them. I like them to know, but that's up to you. So that's the core library settings here. Now let's talk about some of the final settings over here for the overall content settings for both uploading and working with content. So this is sort of this content first one here, the allow contributor comments and ratings, and also allow contributors to assign tags. Both of these are sort of related. On libraries themselves, we have the ability to change what the roles are that people have. In fact, you know what? I better save this right now. And let's go take a look at a library so we can see what those options are. So I'm going to go to Manage Libraries, and I'm going to go take a look at one of my libraries. And again, this is explained in a lot of detail in our library-specific webinar, but I'm going to take a look at just one of these guys here, like my Revit Content CTC library. In here, I have a group that's set up in my company called Everyone. It's a role-based group for everyone at CTC. And in this library, I have all of my users, everyone, set to be using contributor level role within this library. On another library over here, if I go to like my standards and procedures library, I have very intentionally set the permissions for everyone in my company to be a consumer level, not a contributor level. Now first, let me just give a quick explanation of what a consumer level is. It's important for these checkboxes to know a little bit about what this means. The consumer level means that they can find the library, they can search the library, and they can straight up consume content out of it. They can double click content and open it or load it into their active design environment, and that's it. That's all the rights they have to content. Contributors here have the option of having 2 additional roles or 2 additional abilities depending on your options in that user area. That is, they can rate and comment on content, and they can modify tags on content. They can't author new tags, but they can modify tags that are assigned to content in that library if they're a contributor and if the rights are set up appropriately. Now in my standards and procedures environment, I've made everybody consumers because I want to control the tagging and I don't want to invite feedback. However, in my regular Revit content library here, not my standards and procedures, but my regular Revit content, my design environment, I want them to be able to rate and comment on my content in case something's broken. So, and I also want them to adjust tagging because I want them to help the health of my library increase, and I don't want to have to control it all myself. So let's go back into settings and take a look at the 2 checkboxes and understand what they can do for us. So organization settings here, the allow contributor comments and ratings, this means if you've assigned that contributor level role to a library and if this is checked, comments and ratings are available for contributors. Obviously not consumers, they can't do it anyway. Down below that one is the allow contributors to assign tagging. Now, I have some companies who don't want contributors to be able to manipulate tags. I get it. You want to explicitly control that all yourself. Perfect, that's fine. You can simply uncheck this box, and then those roles, those users or groups with the roles of contributor, they actually cannot assign tags. Instead, all they can do in this case is comment and rate. Some companies don't want comments and rating, but they do want tagging. They want the user to be able to assign tagging. And so you can simply switch those checkboxes, and they can't tag or they can't comment and rate, but they can assign tags if they have that contributor level role within the libraries area. Okay? That's what those 2 checkboxes mean. It affects how contributors can interact with the library differently than consumers. Now, if you were to uncheck both of these checkboxes, effectively, you're making the contributor level role on libraries identical to the consumer level role. So I typically don't uncheck this box. If I don't want contributors to do these things, I don't make them contributors. But usually one or the other or both are things that I want a contributor level user to be able to do, and this checkbox lets you have the granularity to control that. Okay? In my case, I want contributors to both comment and rate, and also to be able to assign tags, so I have checked both boxes. Now this next checkbox here is one that I recommend you take a look at right away when you're first beginning to use Hive. In fact, in my normal Hive setup 6-step process, this checkbox right here is one of them that I recommend you check right away. I recommend you uncheck Allow Public Libraries in that first step, typically, unless you're a building product manufacturer. But then here, for the Allow Cloud Content Caching, I recommend that you do check this box right here, Allow Cloud Content Caching. What this does is as you process content into Hive, it doesn't just keep the content exclusively on your network, it caches it into the Hive cloud, which in many cases, especially for project-hosted content, things like walls and ductwork and floors and railings, as well as schedules and typical details and sheets, model groups, all those kinds of project-hosted content, it will discreetly help divide that up and make it even more efficient for end users to be able to consume that as they pull this stuff across the WAN, okay? So I recommend you check this. Now, if you need to, on a library by library basis, it is possible at the library level to tell it not to content cache to the cloud. You can tell it, don't upload my content for this library. If you have one special client who maybe doesn't allow their content to be cloud cached, that's fine. Don't cache for that one library. But as a whole organization, you can still cache your content, which makes the consuming of that system family stuff so much faster. It's lightning fast compared to what it would otherwise be if you had it in like a 250 meg warehouse file that it has to cache into the computer's memory first before it can actually load the stuff. This makes it so much smaller, much more discreet, and much faster. So I do recommend you check this box. I also recommend, in collaboration with that you tell Hive to prefer the cloud content so that it goes there first. You can tell it to go local first, which means if the users are in the main office, it'll go to your local network first. But then if your warehouse file is a 250 meg warehouse file and they're trying to just get this one wall type, their computer has to cache that into memory completely before it can bring that wall type across, and it's slow, super slow to get that wall. So if you prefer that cloud content, it makes it significantly faster because it's getting a super tiny micro file that just contains the wall, caches that, loads it directly into the project, and it's lightning quick, okay? Just below that, you'll notice as I'm checking and unchecking this Allow Cloud Content Caching box, this Allow Downloads is a child of that as well. I generally don't allow users to discreetly right-click on a piece of content here. Let's go back and run the search for doors, right? I don't usually let people go in here and right-click and choose the option to download, to create their own silo of their own content. Sure, they could absolutely open this file directly, which creates a cache of it that effectively does the same thing. They could load it in their project and save it out, sure. But what I'm doing by not allowing downloads is I'm putting just one level of barrier between them right-clicking and directly downloading it to a location and them having to load it first and then save it out to their silo. They could still do it, but it's one level of barrier, and it gives them one less option on the right-click menu that's really not very necessary. So I personally don't allow downloads. Some companies work very heavily based on users grabbing content, intentionally downloading it to their computers, and using it in some fashion. Well, in that case, if they're going to do that with bulk content, maybe you do need to allow downloads. But personally, I usually have this turned off because I don't want that on my right-click, and I don't want my users to have it on their right-click either. There's this other option down here to allow clear content. What this does is allows the user to trigger the clear content cache option directly from their Hive. You know, we talked about how this content cache up here automatically deletes after a certain amount of time. Some users may want to intentionally force that to clear out. You as admins may want to. And so allowing this might be meaningful. This isn't a default setting. This is just, does it allow it or not? And where you can find this within the HIVE CMS here is to go to your username, to go to your user settings, and there's a button here to clear the cache. Now, right now, my cache has about 336 meg of content cached in it. I could clear that right here forcibly, and the next time I start using any of the content that I use regularly, it's going to have to recache it for me. But if I needed to free up some space, maybe I have a lot of content because I use Hive all day, every day in design. Maybe I need to clean it out a bit more. So I can do this real quickly if I really need to. This setting here either enables or disables that button. I personally like to leave it on, so I have that button always left on. The next setting here, disable automatic preview generation, is really affecting, and the next one right behind that one, use existing preview, affects how Hive generates previews automatically or not. When you as an admin are going through the exercise here of adding content, you have the ability here to change how that content processes and discretely how it generates previews for Revit content. You can very explicitly control the exact preview graphics and even down to explicit templates, category by category or host type by host type. AutoCAD itself just generates a preview by default. So it will use whatever's in the AutoCAD block or file to generate its preview, but Revit you can get a bit more explicit because of all that 3D content. So really, do you want Revit, or Hive rather, to be able to automatically generate previews this way? Or do you want to use a preview that is discretely set on the family? That's really the question. If you check disable automatic preview generation, Hive will still go dig into the family and pull the preview that's on the family. But if you want it to generate an automatic preview with the settings that you've defined right here, you can do that so that it'll make really consistent, very nice previews for your content, especially normal loadable Revit family content. That's what this checkbox is saying. Do you want to disable that or do you want to use it? Leaving it unchecked allows Hive to automatically generate a preview. And usually that's the setting that I like to use, especially after I've configured my Hive settings. Now, there are times where you may have intentionally gone into Hive after you've created some content and you've explicitly overridden previews. Sometimes Revit can't generate a preview, like for stairs and railings. So maybe you've explicitly set some previews and you don't want Hive to overwrite that. Well, after you've generated the first round of content, you can tell Hive the next time I process content, if it already exists, I mean, you can generate previews for new content, but you know what? Don't update my previews. Just use what's already there. So you can tell it to do that. Or if you're making major significant changes to your families and your graphics do need to update, you can uncheck this. Hive will generate a new preview, and it will then not use the existing preview, but replace the one that's already there with what it's generating. Whenever I'm doing things like stairs and railings, and sometimes detail and model groups, I typically will actually use my existing previews because I do set my own previews for those types of objects. But that takes me consciously thinking, when I'm in the process of going through and adding content to this list, before I do that, I set up this setting to use or not use depending on what I'm processing, and then trigger my process so that it will do what it's supposed to. So this is one that I sometimes toggle off and on throughout my daily use. This has no effect really on end users. Neither of these two do. What this really affects is me as I'm processing content, how it generates or maintains previews. And I suppose the resulting preview does affect an end user. But I use these two checkboxes to control how that happens. So automatic preview generation uses these content processor settings for Revit family preview generation here. If I check it, it disables this completely and these mean nothing. If I uncheck it, it will use these. And then the use existing preview, once again, is if content's already in there and this is checked, it uses what's already there. And if I uncheck it, then it uses these preview settings to generate a brand new preview and replace the one that's already in the Hive. Okay, final checkbox here is an option. In AutoCAD, this is specifically an AutoCAD setting. There's a security dialog that can pop up on some content, especially things like Lisp routines, VBA routines, scripts, things like that. When you run one of those items out of Hive, because that is an automated script or routine on the system, on the AutoCAD, AutoCAD likes to pop up warnings when you load the content. So here there's a little extra description here. When you have stuff that is on your system in AutoCAD, you can explicitly add a path to the trusted locations in the AutoCAD user's profile. There's actually an option here that says, if secure load is enabled, that needs to happen, or else Hive will, or AutoCAD will stop every single time. So this suppress security dialog, really what it's doing is it's telling Hive the very first time that it drops that secure content that it's going to add that cache folder location, this location right here for the user, to the trusted locations in their AutoCAD profile. It's a complicated way of saying, giving you the option, do you want Hive to automatically add its location, whatever you set here, to your AutoCAD profiles automatically. If you don't do this, then every time they drop something that isn't in a trusted location, AutoCAD will pop up and message the user, this is potentially a dangerous thing. Do you want to actually drop it? And they can answer yes. Or do you want to actually use this? They could answer yes, and you'll still do it, but it prompts them every time. So what we recommend is that you check this box if you want to trust content coming out of Hive, so that it'll add that cache location, and then it will never prompt the user, do you want to trust this content? I mean, you've curated your Hive anyway. You know what's coming in. So if you built your own content and you trust it, you may as well tell AutoCAD, if you're using AutoCAD, to trust it as well. All right, I told you at the end that I would let you screenshot my settings and tell you when I was all done. These are the settings here that I recommend for most firms. You can leverage these directly. If you wanted to tweak any of them, absolutely go do that. But for most design firms, I would recommend these explicit settings for your initial Hive setup. And then certainly in the future, if you ever want to change them, you absolutely can. Now, to commit these settings to your Hive, if you were following along with me, what you could do is simply hit the Save button right here. And that will save all of these settings, write them to your organization, and then the next time people open up Hive, all these settings take effect, and they all work in this form and fashion. All right? Very good. That's pretty much it for this Hive discussion here on all of those organization settings. So for those of you who have stuck around to the end here, I want to say thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in future webinars. So have a fantastic day, and we'll see you later.